This is part 3 of the history of experience, and we're this time dealing with a shift in paradigm from a history of ideas to the history of experience, entitled The Road to a New Paradigm. Well, I started thinking about experience again after I started my journal that was sort of encouraged by my teacher Eric Voegelin to write down my personal episodes that triggered my own interest in my major issues that I pursued in my study of the history of ideas and philosophy and so forth. But for the next decade I had to write my thesis, and this time my topic was Francis Hutcheson, a Scottish philosopher who lived from 1694 to 1746, and whose major work was the inquiry into the original of our ideas of beauty and virtue. Now, if you look at the title, you see that his inquiry is pretty much about the same problem that I have. Where do ideas come from? And he studies particularly the ideas of beauty and virtue. So these are things, he thinks, that do not come from sensation. And his major problem is, where do they come from? You cannot see virtue. You see virtuous people, but the idea of virtue is not visible. So where does it come from? This was the main source for my PhD thesis. And the major thesis of Hutcheson was that they don't come from sensation, but where else do they come from? So what he did, he invented, aside from our normal senses, like our eyes, like our ears, our nose, our palate, and our touch, he invented other senses, calling them the moral sense, the internal sense, or a sense of beauty. But the trouble with these senses is you don't find them. If you look into the human brain or the human body, there are no additional senses, so that was not really a good answer. Anyway, after that I dropped the topic and set out for the next decade to study something else which was more close to the idea of general history. I did a study on the Pacific Island region, which was a lot of fun actually, and took me to Micronesia, Melanesia and Polynesia. And the interesting part, aside from my study in international security issues, was that I got in touch with so many different cultures in so wide an area with so little people, and I could talk to everybody and find out how they would feel and see and experience differently from ours. So what was most interesting, that they had a totally different approach to time and space. While I would be thinking, from Hawaii to Fiji, that's a very long distance, about 5,000 miles, something like that. For them it was just, a month of traveling with a canoe. And they were not even shocked by these distances. And they have a different approach to time as well, because something like, we meet at 4 o'clock does not exist. They would say we meet in the afternoon, and they would meet. How they manage to do so is kind of a miracle, but people don't miss each other without being precise. And they had a totally different idea of the sacred and the profane, about spiritual experience. So it was really, for me, something like a hotbed, like a real panorama of different attitudes and different kinds of experience. But the question that was still unsolved was, actually, what is experience? It's not about content. It's about the structure of experience. And I thought initially it's a simple question, and you just look into a handbook, into an encyclopedia that is studying the history of ideas. But I did so as a parallel issue along my travels. Whenever I got to a library, read some books about the issue, about the topic of experience, but I never found a convincing answer. It was almost similar like Hutcheson did. They were sort of struggling with what it means, but there was no clear-cut answer. And in the end I found someone who noticed the same. you know, when you think yourself something is wrong and you're the only one who thinks so, you think, I'm crazy, the rest is okay. But this time I got someone who sided with me, and that was Hans-Georg Gadamer, a student of Heidegger's. And his major work, Truth and Method, he wrote, however paradoxical it may seem, the concept of experience seems to me one of the most obscure we have. Now, actually, that is the case. Though it is a concept that is used all over science every day, either as experience, as empirical, or whatever, nobody ever took the pains to look into the concept, because everybody looks into the content. So actually, when the question is asked, what is experience, it is most usually equaled with the question, what do you experience? And that refers you to the content. But what I was interested in is not the content. That was clear from the initial start of my project. I was interested in what it is, in the concept. And if you want to look into the concept, you have to look into the structure of experience. Some people call it essence or nature. It's all the same. And actually, the question that you pose when you look into the structure is, how do we experience, not what. That is very important to see the difference. How do we experience? Do we use our eyes, our ears, our inner awareness, our consciousness, our imagination, our fantasy? But it's not equal to the question, what do we experience? Now I see the Bible. Now I see again the binocular. This is two ways of seeing something. It's all seeing, binocular or Bible. But if I shift from seeing to hearing, close my eyes and say, oh, that sounds like the Bible. We are shifting from seeing to hearing. And this is a different kind of how we make experience. And that was already the message of the Stargazer story. Focus on the structure of experience, not on the content. So if you draw this up in a little sketch, what was the situation like? What was the structure of this kind of experience? We had the stargazer on the one side, we have the stars on the other, and we have the sensation, the sensory participation in the middle, between the two. And then we had a shift from the stars to the stargazer himself, and from sensation to self-awareness. So two different types of participation in reality. And that's what is at the center of all types of experience, is a certain type of participation. This is very important. It may be any conscious person and any something or object, but in between there is always participation. The result of the analysis of the structure of experience was a very simple definition. Experience is conscious participation. Initially, that might look like a very academic result, but actually it's very important to understand the composition of what experience is, because this makes clear what part of experience can change over time, and that is the part which I call participation, the way we get in touch with reality. And this we will deal with how that is possible in the next part, part 4, entitled The Human Brain and Culture. Thank you for today. See you in the next part.